Let's talk about proposal automation. This is something that we often hear in sales cycles. It's usually one of the biggest problems that customers want to solve for when they come to Proposify, which is just that there's too much manual entry going on that's eating up a lot of their reps' time. So that's what I want to go over today. What I want to share is not necessarily the guts and the technical piece of how to do it, but just how to think about it. So what Zapier does and what our workflow builder does that are all pretty common, which is just think about it as far as triggers and actions. So when something happens here, do something over there. Way to think about it. The triggers and actions and in between is conditions. So if this thing is true, then trigger it, otherwise not. So when do you want to use these types of things with proposal automation? So the first one I want to talk about is automating content based on buyer choices. So a lot of times people will have lead gen forms on their website that your prospects fill out that, they have to enter fields. And based on those fields, based on what they select, let's say they select a particular package or a particular service, you could generate a proposal document in draft form, so not send it to them automatically, make sure that a rep or somebody internally approves it first, that has basically chosen the content or the pricing or the packages that, that person has chosen. So that's one potential use case. Related to that is the use of variables and fields. One of the biggest problems that we see with proposals is the fact that, reps often are copying and pasting this stuff manually, doing find and replace on client names, which is the most common thing that we see. So it's almost a timeless, universal problem of you get a proposal from a vendor, and then you look at it and it says like Acme Co. or it says some other company you haven't heard of, and you reach out and you're like, who is Acme Co? What? And find and replace didn't work. It's such an embarrassing thing. It's so unprofessional, but it's easy to have happen, right? And we see that sometimes with emails that go out that use automation, right? The first name is wrong, or it just says, actually shows you the first name variable. So what you can do in particularly in proposal software, and you can also do it in, to a certain degree in like Google Docs and Word, is you put in these placeholders, but instead of making sure that a rep manually goes through and enters them, is you can actually have that information get populated automatically from the CRM. So every instance of client name gets filled out. Nobody has to do a find and replace. Nobody has to go through and manually enter it.
That's a huge problem that we see with so many sales reps. Just the find and replace mishap happens in prospecting, happens with proposals. It's shocking how often it still happens.
And what proposal software can do too is it can show you when a field doesn't have a value associated with it. So it can kind of warn you, hey, this variable hasn't been filled in, so that again, you don't get that, hey, first name problem that we see a lot of times in email marketing. So another one, that I've heard of that people have asked for is when you want to get paid from a deal. This sometimes happens with mainly smaller companies because a lot of bigger companies will often have financial component to it where after a contract gets won, sales more or less gives it to finance, and then they handle all the invoicing and billing. But for smaller companies, often they'll want to actually get paid right away, and they don't necessarily have like a separate invoicing function. So this is one of the things where you can make sure that even if a prospect signs the proposal, that it's not actually close won until the deposit is paid. And so you can use Stripe and other payment gateways to make sure that you're asking for even a percentage of the price up front, but then really nothing can happen until that deposit's paid. Generating a contract after a proposal gets accepted. So what we often advise our customers to do is to sort of bake the terms and conditions or the statement of work right into the proposal itself. Essentially, you want to remove as many steps as possible. So you want to put the contract in the document itself so that they can sign off. That's what we try to advise people to do, but it doesn't work in every case. Not every company is set up to do that. There's sometimes just really specific reasons why they need to have two different documents and sometimes more in order to get a deal over the line. So they might want to present the initial proposal up front and then make sure that's okay. And then if the prospect says, yes, this looks good, let's move ahead, then they'll send a separate contract for sign off. That's a great use for automation, right? Because what you can do is say that after this proposal gets signed off, actually generate a contract from a contract template that populates all the information so that there's very minimal work required for the rep to be able to send that out for signature.
Not just triggering contract, but having content from your proposal feed into the contract. Businesses that do B2B and residential, for example, they love to have that automation as well, because on the residential side, usually smaller ticket price, don't really want to have like accounts payable, like tracking all that down. So they'll want to automate that payment flow. Whereas on the commercial side of B2B business side, they'll be okay with sending invoices, having their finance team track that stuff down. So really good in that sense too, when you have multiple business units or streams.
That's a great point. A lot of facilities maintenance or even construction related firms will have that sort of two sides of the business, which is one is B2B and one is B2C, and they have kind of different processes around them. So with the consumer stuff, you want more faster transactions. You might need more process in place for the bigger contracts. Creating a new project and client after a proposal is signed. So if you're a professional services business, you will often have projects, or really any kind of business that deals in services will usually have at least a Basecamp, an Asana, a Teamwork, some kind of a project management tool. And this is just another area where, if you're doing too much copy and paste, manual entry, this is room for error and just extra time that people really don't need to be spending. So after your proposal gets signed, actually move all that information into a new project, move over the contact details of the client, and just set up that initial boilerplate project in your project management tool to begin getting started on the work that they've just agreed to. Renewals. So, a lot of times we're talking about closing new business and getting that initial contract over the line, but a lot of times we're dealing in recurring services or recurring revenue. If you're a SaaS company, you'll usually have annual, sometimes 2 or 3 year contracts. And if you're a services business, it might be just a retainer. They agree to 12 months of monthly service, but it's up for renewal in 12 months. So this is an area where automation can really make your life a whole lot easier, because often it's a separate team dealing with renewals. In professional services, it's often an account management team. In SaaS and software as a service, we talk about customer success. Essentially the same thing. But this is a thing where you can have the software know that after 12 months, that from the date that this was signed, there's going to have to be another contract generated upon renewal. Maybe have that happen 2 or 3 months before renewal, so that they can make sure that they get ahead of any potential churn or cancellation or anything like that. Is a really smart way to use automation.
Yeah, we run all of our CSM renewals go through Proposify today, along with, of course, our proposals for new business. So we're going to get that one set up ASAP.
This one's pretty obvious, but amazing how a lot of people will not do it today. They'll get a contract signed or a proposal signed. They'll download a PDF and they'll upload it somewhere. And really, this is another way that you can just streamline things, right? Is you can just have automatically that signed PDF get moved into your CRM, get moved into your Google Drive or your Dropbox or your Box, whatever you're using for file storage, so that there's a copy of that signed proposal. That's really useful, from a CRM perspective. If anybody at any point in the customer lifecycle wants to go, hey, what did they actually sign off on? They go into the CRM, they see that PDF, they know exactly what was signed, and nobody had to manually do this. It just automatically happened. Follow-up emails or texts. We have a feature in Proposify where you can basically, when you send a proposal, you can input the amount of days that need to go by before a follow-up is sent, and that will automatically turn off once it gets viewed the first time, because we don't want people to spam their customers. You send out a proposal, oftentimes they don't open it, they haven't viewed it. So you can have reminders go out automatically to get them, to remind them to open this. But you can also use this kind of automation in other ways, even just to do internal notifications. Imagine you've sent a proposal to your prospect and maybe they opened it the first time, but then you haven't heard back from them and you've been following up and they haven't answered. Sometimes these deals kind of sit in a bit of a limbo state before you close them off as closed lost in your CRM if they're ghosting you. You could have just regular reminders go out if they haven't viewed it after a certain amount of time. So if initially viewed it once, but now it's been 7 days and they haven't viewed it, send a Slack notification to the rep or through the CRM to say, hey, it's been a week now, you should definitely follow up with this prospect.
Yeah, another good use case for the notifications for internal folks is connecting that to your sales engagement platform. So you get a notification going to the account executive that, hey, proposal hasn't been viewed in X number of days. That triggers a task in your outreach or your Apollo or your sales loft, and then they can actually go in and do that task to follow up. Not just notifying them and leaving it at that, but notifying them and then giving them the action to do. So it's pretty much foolproof to get get the follow-up done.
And you can do the opposite as well, which is if they have viewed it after a certain amount of time. So this is common. When I used to run a web design marketing agency, I would sometimes have a proposal that I sent to prospect and they sort of ghosted me, or they never really got back to me. But then sometimes 6 months later or a year later, they reached out and wanted to talk again. You can use automation to sort of know when they're looking at the proposal again. You can get automation set up to notify the rep or the founder, whoever's selling the deal, to be like, oh, they're looking again, they're engaged. So maybe that's a good time to reach out and follow up. Similarly, expirations. This is a feature that we have in Proposify, and it's a really useful feature to create some urgency around deals. In the case where I was a founder of a web design agency, if a prospect reached out after a year since I sent the proposal and now they wanted to sign off on it, I was sometimes kind of locked into whatever I had priced it at that time. And maybe I'd increased my prices and they wanted me to honor that, but I didn't have an expiration in place, so I couldn't really say, well, now it's more money. But if I had, then I couldn't have done that. Now, what you can do that's more automated, rather than just saying this document expires, is you can actually have like a warning or a notification when it's about to expire. Or you can make that proposal even not viewable or visible after the expiration date. So that can be a way that you can get prospects to really just get out of their own way. It's so natural for people to put off decisions or delay things and not want to go through with the act of but buying is difficult. It's hard and it's painful and people put it off. So it's just one of those things that you can, help people get out of their own way to be like, this thing, the price is, we're only honoring it for 30 days. So you've got to shit or get off the pot.
Yeah, and the key to proposal expirations is tell them up front, this is going to expire. This pricing is only valid for so long, because you don't want them to be caught off guard. You want it to be transparent and you want it to drive that urgency. Be upfront about the expiry, because then there's a mutual alignment on the date that it's going to expire. So
this other piece is more internal. So it's triggering an approval workflow if a deal is above a certain size or a discount is above a certain size. So this can be a way to make sure that, in some organizations, reps go a little bit rogue and they might throw a discount on that is 50% off to get a deal over the line. Or they might just be working a deal that's unusually large for your organization. So maybe if you're used to selling things at around a $10K, annual contract value, this one happens to be $100,000. That's a pretty big deal. And you might want more eyes on it. You might want to get executive alignment or executives bought in or sort of interacting in that sales cycle a little bit, talking to stakeholders. That can be something where you basically say like, okay, if they've inputted the pricing and it's above this certain size, don't actually let them send the proposal before it gets some internal eyes on first, and maybe a manager has to approve it first.
Definitely, before that proposal goes out, you want to have everyone internally aligned on the pricing, especially for a bigger opportunity. The beauty of Proposify is you can also see things that have been drafted, things of that nature earlier on. If you have a big deal, be involved early. I think too often we sort of leave it to the reps until the very end, and then we start to care because it might happen. And that's on pretty much too late most times.
It's surprising to me because sometimes this stuff sounds obvious. I remember even just last year, I think it was, I was involved in a deal with the VP of sales. And what he asked me was, hey, in your software, can you get a visibility into what reps are sending out? I mean, that's not a feature. That's literally like right there. You can see who sent a document. It was surprising that for a much larger company, they literally had no idea what was going out. And I feel like we would know if there was a 100K deal, it would be right there in the CRM. But I think we sometimes overestimate how much chaos is going on in larger businesses and how things are really being left up to the individual and they're not really part of a system.
There's a lot more silos in bigger businesses, which can lead you to miss out on understanding where deals are at, and there's more layers of bureaucracy kind of in between. And I think that lends itself to that lack of visibility of just, you've got certain departments doing things certain ways, and there's politics, and there's all these different things. And so tech and data always allows you to do is cut through all of that and get to the facts. Part of what you can do with something like Proposify is get to those facts really quick because it's all centralized in one place and ideally feeding into your CRM.
This kind of brings to another point, which is Slack messages or whatever your internal communications tool is as a company, having a channel where these things go. Things like when somebody's booked an outbound meeting, when a deal has entered the pipeline, when a deal's been closed won. we've got the sales channel where kind of we get company-wide visibility into that. But that's another thing where you can attach it to proposals, right? You can be like, a proposal was just sent out to the prospect and this is the deal size, or even a proposal was viewed by the prospect. If you wanted to put that in as a Slack notification, you could do that kind of stuff.
There's no better feeling than seeing a Slack notification for a closed won deal. I'll say that. That's probably my favorite notification.
So this one's really kind of, again, very simple, but it's just another one of those things where if you can automate it, why wouldn't you? Which is changing the deal stage based on proposal activity. Obvious example would be your proposal gets won, gets signed, gets accepted, update the opportunity to reflect that. But there's even other ones, like creating the proposal could trigger the opportunity to move to the proposal stage. If that's the way you want to do it, you can also do the opposite. When I change the opportunity stage, generate a proposal. Every company is a little bit different, and sometimes they want the CRM to be the trigger and the proposal to be the action, but sometimes it's the opposite as well.
Stages in CRM is one of those annoying things that reps can easily forget to do. So if you have some automation that does it for them, I think anytime you're taking away some of that manual effort on a rep's plate is good. It's just one less thing a manager has to poke them about. So if you can get automation of document goes out, CRM stage changes, why not if that actually aligns with your process, or vice versa?
Oh, and the last one is kind of similar to the payment one, but again, it could just be that thing that makes finance's life easier, which is when your proposal gets accepted, generate an invoice. We integrate with QuickBooks and some other ones. Really, for your financial team, they're going to have to look at that proposal. They're going to have to look at what was put into the quote or the pricing table and then recreate all that stuff in their invoicing software. Why not generate an invoice that has that whole table already built with whatever the buyer selected? There could have been some upsells or they might have been able to adjust the quantity of something, and having that all go in the invoice so it's accurate. We sometimes hear financial teams say that they're looking at software like Proposify because what is getting reflected in the accounting is not always reflective of what the sales rep sold. And sometimes there might have been discounts in place that weren't reflected in the CRM, which means if they're not reflected in the CRM, they're not getting in the invoice. So again, it's just one of those ways to keep everything accurate and not rely on potential human error.
Going back to the Slack notifications, or if you're using Teams or what have you, notify them of invoice being needed in a channel automatically so that then they can make sure that, okay, that invoice did go into the finance software. I'll go in, make any tweaks, and actually get it out the door. So kind of having not only the automation of getting the information into the next tool, but a notification that there's work to be done and an invoice to be sent out.
All right, so that's all of our automation tips for proposals. If we missed anything, be sure to leave it in the comments, and also make sure you subscribe to our channel, the Proposify channel. We're always sharing best tips, practices, strategies on how to make your proposals more automated, but also more effective at winning new business. Bye for now.